The high temperatures, lack of snow, and presence of rain this December is beginning to shape up as the warmest winter in history. On the genocide in Palestine, updated reports indicate that in the West Bank, 3,450 people are injured, 303 people are killed, including 76 children, and in Gaza, more than 7,000 people are missing, more than 54,036 people are injured, and at least 20,424 people have been killed by the Israeli occupation, including at least 8,200 children. In Bethlehem, Christmas has been cancelled, and people across the world have made comparisons of the families in Gaza to the family of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
This year, Christmas celebrations are cancelled in Bethlehem, and for obvious reasons. It's impossible to celebrate while our people in Gaza are going through a genocide, when children are being massacred in such a brutal manner. All the heads of churches in Jerusalem decided that Christmas celebrations will be mainly prayers with no festive celebrations. We thought of what is meaning of Christmas for us as Palestinians, and what message do we want to send to the world about the meaning of Christmas today. So we came up with this idea of a manger in the midst of a rubble, resembling a destroyed house in Gaza, and the child Jesus as a child who's under the rubble. We've seen so many images of children being pulled out of the rubble, and to us this is a message that Jesus identifies with our suffering. He's in solidarity with those who are oppressed. He's in solidarity with those suffering. So it's a message of comfort and hope to us, but it's also a message to the world that this is what Christmas looks like in Bethlehem. This is what Christmas looks like in Palestine, with occupation, with destruction, with the bombardment of children. While the world is celebrating, our children are under the rubble. While the world is celebrating, our families are displaced and their homes are destroyed. So this is Christmas to us in Palestine.
Melanie Yazzie. I'm here today on behalf of the Red Nation. Right back at you. Today, we deliver a devastating blow to colonialism. That's right. As Indigenous people of Turtle Island, we proclaim that decolonization and land back are the only forms of justice for the crimes of settler colonialism. Native people, unfortunately, have been here before. We know the entire history and future of Palestine because we have lived it. We endure the settler colonial project that calls itself the United States. That's right. We survived the elimination and removal of our ancestors. We are in our 5th century of resistance. We know that Palestine's future is a certain future because we are still here. Yet Palestine represents an alternative path for the native nations of Turtle Island. In this moment of our shared history, Palestine brings us closer than ever to the promise of true self-determination for all colonized people of the world. We fulfill our ancestors' dreams by standing with Palestine today. Palestine is the tip of the spear that steers us all towards liberation. That's right. And settler colonialism holds nothing back, and yet it cannot defeat those whose cries for liberation resound louder than any bomb they can drop on us. Colonialism is failing, crumbling under the the weight of its own conceit. The fort is breached and the wagons are burning. The end of colonialism nears because the end of colonialism is inevitable. The United States wages endless wars to maintain its position as the supreme settler colony of the world. Ours is the oldest struggle against U.S. colonialism. Now is the chance to redeem your humanity, settlers of our stolen land. By standing with Palestine and standing with us. That's right. The end of U.S. imperialism is the only solution for us, for Palestine, and for the world. Mark our words. The humble people of the earth have spoken. There is no place for colonialism on Mother Earth. For the earth to live, colonialism must die. That's right. A free Palestine frees us all to build a future of peace and equality. And today we join our Palestinian relatives in a righteous struggle to author a new society. To our relatives in Gaza, we say, Eba nihitzil, through kinship we are strong. May our message carry far across the sea. Gaza, Gaza, you will see. Palestine will truly be free. Keffiyeh.
We are always in solidarity with our Palestinian comrades because we recognize that being Indigenous isn't simply an identity. It's a political identity. We are Indigenous because of our place in the process of settler colonialism. If colonizers never came here, if settler colonialism never had happened, I would just be Teotoa. You know, I wouldn't be Indigenous or Indian or anything like that. Yep. And we recognize the processes of settler colonialism all over the world. And right now, today, we have a very special guest with us. Is here in New Mexico, a brand new comrade of ours. He is a Palestinian writer, poet, world famous Arab GQ, Mohammed El-Kurd.
Hello everyone, it's such an honor to be here. I'm really, really grateful that I could be a participant in this. I hadn't really prepared, but I wrote some words down. First of all, my name is Mohammed El-Kurd. I grew up in a city called Jerusalem. It's occupied. I was born and raised in occupied Palestine. My life, my family's life, my grandparents' life have been marked by land theft, by military occupation, by colonialism, and by conquest. A conquest that continues to this day. So being here today, I identify so much with this. I identify with the Indigenous people's struggle for sovereignty and freedom and control and the right to take care of their land and resources. Being here today on this stolen, occupied land where people suffer less and less access to resources and water and land and so on, it is incumbent upon us to reject any celebration of colonialism, let alone a celebration of the legacy of a murderous, bloodthirsty war criminal like Aniote. I am, honestly, above everything else, I don't know, I'm not good at speaking at rallies, but I have to say something. I am so disgusted by the people here who have nothing better to do. Yes. Whose lives are so empty that they have nothing better to do than to celebrate the legacy of a murderous war criminal. Life could be so much better. You could build a much better legacy. You could wash your hands of this blood. And yet you decide to do this. Not only should these statues come down, but all land must be given back. Land must be given back to its nurturers, to its caretakers, to its rightful owners. I want to say that I believe from Turtle Island to Palestine, occupation is a crime. Thank you.
Let's go! From Taiwan lands to Palestine.
Occupation is a crime!
From Taiwan lands to Palestine.
Occupation is a crime!
Today, we are holding our Friday night forum on Palestine and the blockade on Gaza on May 15th, the commemoration of Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe that marks the creation of the settler colonial state of Israel and the ongoing expulsion and dispossession of Palestinians as we continue to fight for our right to return to our homeland. We are joined by three amazing presenters today who will bring a great deal of wisdom to this topic. In the spirit of this series, I'd like to ground this conversation on the connection with Indigenous liberation struggles, our histories of colonialism, and our commitments to internationalism. Commemorating Nakba, the ongoing colonization of Palestine, resituates Palestine as a third world struggle, an anti-colonial struggle against all forms of oppression. And as we always say, if you believe in the human rights for Palestinians, in the struggle for self-determination, for people to live free of exploitation and structural violence, you cannot fight for Palestine against settler colonialism and militarism abroad without fighting its domestic manifestations, that being the violence against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people here in the United States. Furthermore, as we address the blockade on Gaza in particular, we must also understand Gaza as part of the continuity of the Palestinian national liberation struggle, not as a separate project or place. I am really delighted to first introduce Osama Tanous. Osama is a specialized pediatrician based in Haifa, Palestine, and a researcher for the Galilee Society, the Arab National Society for Health, Research, and Services. He's a 2020 candidate for the Fulbright Fellowship in Public Health Policies. Osama is joining us from the very late hours in Palestine, so I would like to appreciate him for staying up for us tonight, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to him. Thank you, Osama, for joining us.
Hi, thank you, Lara, and thank you for the audience for joining in on this very important topic. Okay, so I think whenever we have any emergency in Palestine, and here it's a global emergency, especially for the US audience, people always look at the headlines of Gaza and what is happening in Gaza or the West Bank and how are they dealing with it. And we saw this happening also with the COVID, with questions popping up like how many ventilators does Gaza have, or ICU units, or so on. And I think a lot of that problem questions have a bit of the problem within it, when people treat Gaza or the West Bank as these geographical units that are there and that have been there. And I think it's a moment, it's good to start reflecting on what is Gaza and what is the West Bank, what is the Gaza Strip. So it's important to start grounding the debate that the Gaza Strip is an artificially created strip of land. Before 67 and 48, there was no such thing as the Gaza Strip. Gaza Strip Gaza was a city, it's a coastal city in Palestine, like Jaffa and Haifa and Akka and other cities. And the Gaza Strip has been drawn by the settler colonial frontier expansion. Right, and it constitutes it's a small strip of land where 80% of the people are refugees, and this is you need to understand how did the problem of Gaza begin. It began with the creation of the Gaza Strip as a kind of dumping ground for the frontier expansion of the settler colony, and 80% or more of the population in Gaza are refugees, in fact, right? This is before we start to talk about the Israeli military occupation in 67 of Gaza and the West Bank, settlements, and then the siege and ongoing bombardments and wars. So Gaza is created and crafted after a sequence and chain of events that has made it the way it is at the moment, where it is on the edge of unlivability. So this is the same regarding Gaza and the West Bank, and I guess it's the same regarding indigenous population all over the world. Our entire habitat has been shaped by the settler colonial project and by its expansion. So also now, as we speak, Israel is trying to annex settlements into of the West in the West Bank, illegally occupied. So also the West Bank is an artificially created piece of land, and the settlements are these floating islands of sovereignty that Israel has over there. And then the borders of Israel are constantly shifting, right? It's very hard to define what is Israel and where does Israel's sovereignty starts and begin. And this is quite important in understanding how Gaza was created. And from that, of course, this has led to endless health repercussions. So as as a doctor and people who are involved in public health in Palestine, the whole social contract between the people and the state does not exist, right? We do not have a state in order to have a social contract of what kind of health do we health rights, and what is the duties of the state, and who provides what for whom. So all of that is inconsistent also in Gaza and also in the West Bank. And of course, for the refugees and for Palestinians in 48, it's a bit more complicated, and I can explain about that later in the Q&A section. So if we imagine Gaza being this small strip of land with a hugely condensed area of refugees, and then being military occupied, during the Israeli military occupation between 1967 and until the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, the Palestinian healthcare infrastructure was completely de-developed and defunded, where Israel, as a military force, has obligation for the health of Palestinians. Then, we had the PA, the Oslo Accordings, the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, and with that you had multiple healthcare providers, including the Palestinian Ministry of Health, the UNRWA, different NGOs, and for-profit and private clinics and hospitals. And all of that creates an impossible, chaotic, mishmash network of healthcare providers, where it's completely unclear who provides what for whom. And also, of course, the data is not clear. And this makes it very hard to really establish healthcare policy and how to have a program. And this is what I experienced in several trips to Gaza with the Physicians for Human Rights, where we sit with doctors, try to make a plan for how do we deal with this kind of disease or that kind of disease or so on. And you understand that practically when you do not have sovereignty, and when you do not know what will happen next month and which medications will be available next month and whatnot, and will the staff be trained? So all of that lack of sovereignty, lack of political governance over your own land, and of course an unbearable and hermetic siege that controls what gets in and out in terms of also food, but also staff and medications and equipment, and if an equipment is broken, who will repair it, and so on. So even before the whole COVID-19, you had a very fragile healthcare system in Gaza that is just the product of endless settler colonial violences that has completely shaped the health and disabilities and diseases and death of Palestinians. And of course, within that, you had endless cycles of Israeli aggression and bombardment with bombing and wars and the attacks on the Great March of Return. So on top of all that very fragile and very vulnerable scene of health in Gaza, the COVID-19 enters. And it enters right exactly to re-emphasize how dependent and how captive the Palestinian community is in Gaza, the West Bank, and in other places as well, the refugees. So then questions start rising about how many ventilators Gaza have, who will get ventilators, and how will we get ventilators in, and how many testing kits Israel will enter into Gaza, and if it does, is it a sign of good neighboring? And you have these ridiculous headlines of Israel helping Gaza to combat COVID-19 and so on. But that again recreates this whole dependency where you are merely a surplus population. Gaza is just there waiting in the waiting room. It is not a political actor. It does not have sovereignty. It cannot act. It cannot plan. it cannot import or export anything, and among that, it becomes to be seen as a humanitarian case, as something that is unfortunate, where people are poor and need donations and so on, as if it's a product of an earthquake or a natural disaster. And here, I think it's very important to completely dismantle this humanitarian narrative of Ghazi being, poor. It is poor, of course, and it is unfortunate, but it is so because of political factors. And the healthcare of Palestinians, whether in Ghazi and other places, is intimately linked to their political status, and the solution is also a political solution. Right, so as we saw people calling for the left of sanctions on Iran or Venezuela or Cuba, the same should apply to Ghazi. The overall solution to the healthcare status in Ghazi is the lifting of the siege, lifting of the blockade, and ultimately the right of return, right, to deconstruct Ghazi as the Gaza Strip as a geographical entity that has been created by these colonial frontier expansion. So I think it's quite important to frame that in such area, in such framework of Ghazi as a product of colonial policies, of the solution being political in every case, and when doing advocacy work, of course, in the immediate term, it is important to talk about entering medical equipment and ventilators and testing kits into Ghazi, but to re-emphasize why people need to have such a huge effort in helping Ghazi, and why Ghazi has become dependent, and why is it why life there is so quite captive, I would say. And another thing that we as Palestinians found a bit sarcastic, I would say here, is with the COVID, people starting looking at Ghazi fully alarmed and counting how much death will Ghazi have, how many people will be infected, how many people will die. And I think it's it's a bit similar places have had that after COVID, but it seems as if there's this new concerns with the deaths of Palestinians, with the suffering of Palestinians in Ghazi, and especially with the COVID, which is a kind of theatrical death that everyone is counting by the day how many people have died and how many have recovered and survived. We need to remember that in the background of all of this, people die continuously in Ghazi for reasons that are avoidable and unnecessary completely, whether it's dying from Israeli military aggression, direct bombing and killing and shooting on the marshes of Bethlehem, but also due to the entire situation where people die from diabetes and heart diseases and hypertension and infections because you do not have enough sanitation and hygiene and water. You have an incredible amount of poverty and unemployment and depression and frustration and whatnot. So there is a slow death that is there in Ghazi, and that is killing people by the moment and by the day, that is not counted, that is not registered, that is not in these updated figures. And we need to always keep that in mind, that people die slowly when we talk about political violence as a cause of mortality, as something affecting the health of the population. It's not always the direct killing of the people, but sometimes it's the creating of the whole stage, the whole infrastructure where people die slowly from unnecessary reasons at all. So this should be always kept in mind. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Osama.
Yate Shike Dosa Dene, Remy Ishia, Shihin Dishle, Manamani Basha Chi, Specifically Dashi Chain, Base Pachai Dashanella, Zitla Jean Denasha. My name is Remy and I come from Black Mesa, an area of the Navajo Reservation that was home to one of the most dangerous strip mining operations in the world. And so in terms of colonization, these issues that are brought up, genocide, the disappearance of our relatives, put in cages, some as young as infants at the border, the quote-unquote so-called border. So a lot of the opposition to this type of art, I think, really is a reflection of the people here that still don't understand history. There's 100 to 140 million of us that aren't here anymore due to colonization, racism, and genocide. And so what this wall depicts is another indigenous struggle from our brothers and sisters in Palestine, where they're relegated to open-air prisons, like the West Bank, like Gaza. And if you look at some reservations here, it has the same effect in terms of imprisonment. The struggle initially started with the city's allocation of a 3 by 5 foot sign. And that was what we were given in terms of what Jeffrey Haas and a lot of organizations that were trying to advocate for the rights of Palestine and the people that live within the country. And so that wasn't enough, I guess, for the people, the racists that were here. They decided to take knives to the images of children, Palestinian children. And so taking the resistance outside of the predetermined borders is something that indigenous people, we don't recognize and we don't honor. We have no borders on our land. And so expanding it to this wall itself was a way to show that, you know, the people that make decisions about what is historic on Tewa land, I hope those are Tewa people. You know, we have a city council meeting on the 25th at 6 p.m. where we're invited to give our public testimony. And so I hope that I'll see a lot of you there, some of those folks that helped put up the wheat paste, a form of street art, a form of resistance that has never asked for permission, and nor will it ever. And as indigenous people on our own land, we should embody that as well, because this is our land. This is Tewa land. This is indigenous land. And so this is for our people in Palestine. We recognize you. Your names are on our walls here. Fawzi Al-Junaidi, Faris Ode, Mohammed Al-Dura. And we have a new one that we invite folks to go ahead and look at as well to get educated, because these aren't manipulation of photos. These are just picked from the internet. So the names on each one of these pieces has a history behind them. And so I challenge you and anybody else who has an issue with some of these images of indigenous resistance to do the homework yourself, educate yourself, make your own decisions. And so I want to thank everyone that came out in support. I never thought this would be like this, but I'm glad that, you know, we have this opportunity to voice our opposition to what is known as, I guess, art here in Santa Fe, which is pretty sad. But what I see here is a thirst for street art, a place where we can go ahead and post anything, anywhere. And so this being Santa Fe, second only to New York in terms of art, we shouldn't have to explain this medium. We shouldn't have to explain these images, these messages, because it's us. It's our land. And so, thank you all. Yeah.
So let's bring it back just a second, because we kind of strayed away from the conversation. Well, but should we return to the action that happened recently and talk about the artwork? Because this is what really spurred this conversation in local media, and the coverage in local media has been horrendous. But the Navajo artist Remy, did a series of murals and wheat paste on a wall. I can't remember it's right out here where we're doing this.
Old Pecos Trail.
Yeah, on the Old Pecos Trail.
Which is one of the thoroughfares in Santa Fe.
Yeah, it's where a lot of people drive by it every day. But it depicts scenes of resistance, but also kind of scenes of subjugation
and occupation.
So there's the child throwing the rock at the tank, the Abraham tank, which is named after Abraham Lincoln, and probably it's a U.S. made tank. And then there's also children cowering from an IDF soldier who's pointing an automatic rifle at them. there was a picture, and I can't remember her name, of the nurse who, Razan Al-Ajjar, who was killed, targeted by snipers, Israeli snipers.
During the Great March of Return
in 2018. And so those are really like touching photos and pictures. But what was happening in the media is like they were just ignoring the fact that this guy was a Navajo artist and that he was explicitly making connections to the occupation of indigenous lands here, as well as the indigenous lands in Palestine. And I was wondering, Elena, if you could just talk briefly about Ogapoge, its meaning and its significance, but also the significance of having those murals.
So Ogapoge is white shell water place. It's what we call Santa Fe and Tewa, and it's actually refers to a spring that was down right downtown by where, beneath where the St. Francis Cathedral is today. And all of the lands around here were referred to by Ogapoge. The murals were, when I first saw them, were amazing because they really brought to me immediately that what he was trying to do was draw the correlation between this is occupied land, the same as it is in Palestine, and we don't have Abraham tanks pointed at us. We're not subject to sniper fire on a daily basis. But if you go to downtown Santa Fe, and Orion referenced this earlier, it is a violent place. It is a violent place to be indigenous because everything that exists in downtown Santa Fe exists because of Pueblo people or because of Native people. The architecture, the art, literally everything you see in the shops was either produced by Native people or it's been exported to so-called third world countries to reproduce so they can sell it cheaper and make more money off of those designs. The shops around the plaza, which pay thousands and thousands of dollars in rent and buy Native art for a pittance to the artist and resell it for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. They're making their living off of Native people. And yet when Native people want to sell for themselves, they're basically put on display under the portal of the Palace of the Governors like animals, subject to regulations by the Museum of New Mexico system. And they're there so that tourists can consume that and can be made to feel like they are actually interacting with a real Native person, like an animal in a zoo. And so it's a place of extreme violence. It's a place of extreme oppression. And even though we don't have guns pointed at us on a daily basis, you still feel that violence when you're downtown. And one of the things that was most violent was the celebration of the subjugation of our people during fiestas, which the Red Nation put an end to, thankfully. But that to me was a direct statement against that level of violence that we experience here in Santa Fe. And so to see these things on a wall, and everyone refers to it as the adobe wall. It's actually not adobe, it's a stucco wall. Not that that makes a difference, but it is basically a Pueblo architectural design. And Remy put those images there to reflect on the similarities between our struggle and the struggle of the Palestinians. And people went apeshit because they were anti-Semitic. It was blood libel. I mean, how could you possibly want these images when people are walking up and down the road with their children? Well, maybe if you taught your children about how you want human beings to be treated, both here and at the so-called southern border with Mexico. We don't want to put children in cages. We don't want to have guns pointed at your children. Like, if that's reality and you're afraid of it, then maybe you need to examine your own life and your own values and morals, because it's not okay to be on a wall where your children can see it, but it's okay that it's actually happening in Palestine. And I think Remy, it was a masterful project, and it went down. I mean, it didn't.
Hi everyone. My name is Orion Longknife. I'm going to introduce myself in my mother's language, because when we use that language, when we use the gift that we have always treasured and continue to nourish, we continue to uphold the connections given to us to stand here in this moment. So listen when I speak. Hello, my name is Orion Longknife. I am born to the surrounded by rocks people, but I am made for the white clay people. My maternal grandfather's clan is Grinds Upward people. My paternal grandfather's clan is the Cree people, of the Chippewa Cree people of Rocky Boy, Montana. That's a long ways away, but we're connected because I stand here today in front of you as your relative, as your comrade, as someone who knows that we need to continuously provide support to Palestine, to Palestine. I'm going to read a poem that was shared with me by a Palestinian poet named Ryan Martinez. This poem I'm going to read, it was shared 20,000 times. And the Israeli military, the Israeli occupiers, they arrested her. They arrested her for 11 months in administrative detention. They put her under psychological torture, under physical torture, because they said that this poem was inciting a riot. All it did was fortify the Palestinian people, our relatives, now and forever. With that being said, I'm going to continue with this poem. I'd appreciate it if I could get full attention. These words are not mine. These words are a relative, and they need to be heard. Oh, I'm not done yet, though.
When you really at the wrong time.
This poem is titled Resist My People, Resist Them. It's authored by Dareen Tator. This English translation is provided by Tariq Al-Haidar. Resist my people, resist them. In Jerusalem, I dressed my wounds and breathed my sorrows and carried the soul in my palm for an Arab Palestinian, for an Arab Palestine. I will not succumb to the peaceful solution. Never lower my flags until I evict them from my land. I cast them aside for a coming time. Resist, my people, resist them. Resist the settlers' robbery and follow the caravan of martyrs. Shed the disgraceful constitution, which imposed degradation and humiliation and deterred us from restoring justice. They burned blameless children. As for Hadil, they sniped her in public, killed her in broad daylight. Resist, my people, resist them. Resist the colonialist onslaught. Pay no mind to his agents among us, who chain us with the peaceful illusion. Do not fear doubtful tongues. The truth in your heart is stronger. As long as you resist in a land that has lived through raids and victory. So Ali called from his grave, resist, my rebellious people. Yes. Write me as prose on the agar wood. My remains have you as a response. Resist, my people. Resist them. Resist, my people. Resist them.
Resist my people, resist them! Resist my people, resist them!
With this, I want to offer thank you. You're all here. You're all here to support Palestinians. You're all here to support Wet'suwet'en, Unista'en, the Gitsan people, us, Tewa people, all Pueblos across this land, all Apache people, all Diné people, the Atam. We are here because we understand that this system is a chain and each link stays continuously binding us, not to the earth, but to systems that never had a chance here.
That's right.
Our roots are stronger than the settler fantasy. We have never had to rely on English to let us know that the cactus fruit, the sunflowers, the choke cherries, the acorn are our relatives. And as we stand here to respect and honor and to support them, remember that you walk away from this moment knowing that you said a free Palestine, knowing you said give the land back, knowing you said no to extractive resources. We are here together in a moment that will last and echo throughout this universe. Our ancestors hear us. We hear each other. Our children, our pets, even our plants, they all hear us and they know their truth. And it is not apartheid. It is not occupation. It is not police or security states. It is being a relative. It is being a relative, a good one. Yeah.
Absolutely. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to the Anti-War Committee, to Red Nation, to all the folks that joined us tonight during this really devastating time. I think it's so vital that we have this sense of community, we have this sense of unity, and that we're honoring the Indigenous people in the way that that's not performative, that's not just superficial and artificial. That's actually material. That we're sitting here and we're calling for actual material changes, whether that be what the panelists are saying, what Melanie was saying, or in Palestine, the material changes being the end of the blockade. It's not just ceasefire, it's an end to the occupation. It's land back in Palestine as well. So I greatly enjoyed the panel. I loved hearing from my Indigenous brothers and sisters. And I think I want to, elaborate on some of the points that were made, because I think there's a lot of really important talking points that were brought up and that I'd like to substantiate. The first one is the discussion on, I guess, the colonial framework that defines all of the Zionist movement historically. And when we refer to Zionism as a settler colonial project, I really want to stress this. This is something that was very overt and unabashed within Zionist discourse historically. This is not just a metaphor. This is not just something the opinionated Arab, is just getting up and saying it's a colonial blah, blah, blah. Like, I think that's a lot of times the way that we want to frame it, that it's just kind of, it's just someone being opinionated or whatever. But that's actually not the case. And right now, we're seeing a lot of revisionism within Zionist discourse. Suddenly, Zionist discourse wants to claim that it's a decolonization movement. You can get a shirt on Etsy that says, like, decolonized Judean, which doesn't even have a nice ring to it anyway. It doesn't. And when you actually look at the documentation, Zionist leaders, the pioneers of modern political Zionism, openly bragged about how colonial their movement is. I'm going to give a few examples. One of them, if anyone knows, Zev Jabotinsky, who is the founder of the modern-day Likud party. He was founder of the the Jewish Legion of the British Mandate Army, and he wrote an essay in 1923 called "The Iron Wall." How many of you, show of hands, how many of you are familiar with this essay? So about a few of you, okay, and that's fine. And this is so important. So I actually like that, because y'all are going to get some bombshell info. And this essay, he basically writes a very, very disgusting essay. And the premise of the essay is, we're colonizers, they're the colonized people, they're the natives, and that's it. Like, we're colonizers and they're not going to accept us. Why would they accept us? They're the natives, and that's fine, right? So he has a famous line in that essay where he says, Zionism is a colonization adventure which stands or falls on the question of armed forces. You can go home and literally look up this essay. Just look up Iron Wall Jabotinsky, read it again, share it with everyone, and you won't be surprised, but you'll be disgusted. And one of the things he says in this essay that I think is very, very relevant to today's discussion is he says, for anyone that wants to say, oh, you can't compare the colonization of the Americas to Palestine, blah, 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 these fake progressives. For anyone that wants to say that, he says in the essay, the Zionists, or excuse me, he flips it, sorry. The Palestinians are the sow and their rolling prairies. And the Zionists are the Pilgrim Fathers, the real pioneers of North America. He says those words verbatim. This is not a paraphrase. This is verbatim. The Palestinians are like the Indigenous Americans, and we, the Zionists, we are like the Pilgrim Fathers. So for anyone that wants to say that this is not a legitimate analogy, you can stick it up with Jabotinsky. I don't know. This is one example. I'm going to give a couple others. One of them is Theodor Herzl, who many of you are familiar with, is often known as the founding father of modern political Zionism. He wrote a pamphlet called The Jewish State, which kind of popularized and mobilized for the movement. And he wrote a letter in 1903, amongst many letters, by the way. There's like many that I can quote. But 1903, he writes a letter to Cecile Rhodes, who is the prime minister of the Cape Town colony, excuse me. And he says, I'm kind of paraphrasing the first part of his quotation, but he says something like, I'm inviting you to this grand project. It's not one of Asia Minor or of Africa, and it's not one of Englishmen, but of Jews. It is something colonial. That's verbatim. That's his quote. It is something colonial, right? There's a number of other examples, and one that I really want to highlight is Israel Zangwill, who's also a very prominent Zionist thinker. And in 1911, he wrote an essay, and it was called The Voice for Jerusalem. Now, he was writing this essay about why he is no longer a Zionist, because he had been propagating for the Zionist movement, and then he changed his mind. And in the essay, he has this really, really incriminating quote where he says, unless the Zionists are to go about massacring the modern Canaanites, Zionism will remain largely moonshine. So there's the obvious thing that jumps out at you, which is unless they're going to go massacring people, this is not going to work. But look at his language. The Palestinians are the modern Canaanites. They are the indigenous people. And this was an acknowledgement that was ubiquitous in Zionist discourse. It wasn't some fringe opinion. It wasn't like, oh, there was debate. Some of them were like, are they indigenous? Are they not? There was a consensus of understanding that the people that lived there were the natives of the land. And at that time, colonialism was cool. Before World War II, colonialism wasn't just cool. Colonialism was amazing. And it was something to brag about. But now suddenly, when political discourse, when progressive discourse changes its tune, when the world becomes all peace-loving, it's after World War II, now we want to change our tune as well. We're a decolonization movement. Really? Read your own history. Y'all had a funding bank called the Jewish Colonial Trust, the Jewish Colonization Fund of Palestine. These are actual names of institutions. You can look them up and you will find every single one of them, right? Now, somebody wants to claim, this is like the Zionist devil's advocate in my head that's like, oh, well, they just called it that because back then it was cool to be colonial. They were just trying to appeal to these colonial entities to help them execute their movement. Two problems with this. If you have to appeal to colonial entities to execute your movement, that probably means you're colonial. It's like an organization saying we're anti-racist, we're, Black Lives Matter, et cetera, but getting funding from the KKK. If you need to get your funding from the United States or Great Britain or any other colonial project, you are colonial, right? But then second, the other problem with it is not just semantics. We see materially how the Zionist project was executed was colonial. Whether they called it that or not, they could say, this is progressive, and their actions could say something totally different. We can just see it by the actions. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the Nakba, with the ethnic cleansing operations. I don't have to go into detail about that. So that was, I guess, the first thing that I wanted to kind of comment on. And the next thing, the second thing that I want to talk about relating to the way that we understand colonization in Palestine is that the strategy for colonization, a lot of times we have a very stereotypical, very archetypal idea of what colonization has to look like, right? If it's not mass expulsion of everyone, the Zionists, they could kill everyone in Gaza if they want. They didn't kill everyone yet, right? It's just ridiculous, right? We have this idea that it has to be a certain way in order for it to be colonization, right? That it's more colonial in Gaza than it is in 48. That it's more colonial in Gaza than it is in the West Bank. Let's do away with these ideas. Let's do away with these ideas that there's better colonialism. There is no better colonialism. Colonialism is colonialism. So the strategy in, Israel's very, and I don't want to say smart about their strategy because I don't want to praise colonialism, but they're very strategic about the way that they have executed colonialism differently in their respective regions that they have occupation over. And I don't think one is better or worse. I think they're just different. And I think that they function based on the objectives of their project very differently. In 48, the strategy is a lot more covert. The strategy is championing the Jewish majority, which they already laid the groundwork for when they annexed 78% of Palestine in 1948. So there's not a lot of expulsions that have to happen there because Palestinians already make up 20% of that population. They already did all of that in 48, right? So their colonialism there is much more covert. They already have this Jewish majority and they champion it through laws like the nation-state law, through laws like the law of return, right? Laws that champion that Jews have self-determination only. That's verbatim language of the nation-state law. That's what it is in 48. Then you go to the West Bank. In the West Bank, their strategy is a lot different. It's one of trying to maximize a Jewish majority, but also, ever think about why Israel has not annexed the West Bank yet? They could if they wanted to, because the West Bank does not have a Jewish majority. And so they're exercising just the amount of control over it to be able to control the land and the resources without having to compromise the basis of their colonial supremacy. That's very crucial. Is 48 better than the West Bank? West Bank better than? I don't think so. I think they're two different strategies. Gaza has a very different strategy. The strategy there, now this is very interesting, was designated as a hostile territory, cut it off from the rest of the region, right? Designated as hostile territory to do two things. One, justify the colonial enterprise, right? Oh, Gaza's just full of terrorists, it's full of this, it's full of that, and so we get to continue the very actions that we are glorifying to the world and deeming as something that's vital for a security state or whatnot, right? And then the second thing is prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state, prevent a discussion of the refugee problem, prevent a discussion of a free Palestine. So I don't know how much time do I have left? Sorry, I'm getting carried away. I'm done. It's okay. All right, can I wrap it up with one thing? I'm done. All right, I'll wrap it up with one thing. So, I'm always done. I don't know. All right, I'll wrap it up with this. So, a lot of people, there's this idea out there that the blockade of Gaza is because of the election of Hamas. There are no Hamas, there'd be no blockade. There'd be no Hamas, there wouldn't be any issues. Everything would just be all right. Here's the one thing I want you to take away anything. In 2004, then advisor to former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, his name was Dov Weisglass, he did an interview with Haaretz. And in that interview, he explicitly said that the purpose of the disengagement from Gaza was to prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. The disengagement, he said, would be formaldehyde, in that it would prevent a discussion of the refugees, prevent a discussion of all the rights of the Palestinians, all their grievances, and they could effectively designate it as hostile territory and not have to deal with it. Remember this, history did not begin on October 7th. History did not begin in the last couple of months. History does not begin with Hamas. It begins with a strategy to dismantle the rights of the Palestinian people and assert colonial supremacy.
The segue question, having all that said, because I don't want to be blabbering this whole time, is this particular issue is often framed as being along racial lines, right? Which really gets ridiculous. People get caught up on identity politics, right? People claim they're in favor of supporting a figure like Oñate because of quote-unquote Spanish heritage. And it's framed as an issue between like natives and Hispanos, but we know that that's not what it's about at all. This is about settler colonialism. And so I see that parallel when we're thinking about Palestine and looking at Palestine, where people try to make it a dispute between like Palestinians and Jews, for example, when we know that's not what it's about. So during this action, I attempted to deflect or redirect the conversation and be like, we're talking about settler colonialism, we're talking about people who are occupied, and we're talking about not any kind of ethnic disputes. We're talking about a settler colonial project where there is obvious systemic power imbalances. So I just wanted to kind of hear your thoughts on that and how we navigate these, these narratives that really seek to undermine our movements and to derail us from, our principled fight.
That is the word, derail, right? I feel like these kinds of claims are often put forth to kind of distract from the focal point at hand. It's ridiculous. And it sounds ridiculous to the average listener that there is a a dispute about some Spanish guy, or that there's somebody who has grievances with Jews being in Palestine. But the reality of the matter is, it's about the land. It's about colonizers who have come over from foreign parts of the world, who have taken over our lands, who have desecrated our lands. But these kinds of distractions, like painting it as a civil dispute or as a religious conflict, and even more recently in Palestine as a real estate dispute, serve to kind of, ridicule and, like you said, undermine our struggles for liberation, undermine our struggles for, being free on our own lands. But what I find ridiculous about what you just shared is that let's assume even that this is about some Spanish guy. This is a Spanish guy with a bloody legacy, and the fact that anybody is celebrating that bloody legacy, to me, is bizarre. But it reveals something, right? It reveals something about the people we're dealing with today, and it reveals something about the climate we're in today. We think about colonialism as a past event, as a relic of the past, as something that we should, get reparations for, and we should get, collect apologies for. But in fact, colonialism, sentimentally and systemically, is very alive and well, be it here or be it in Palestine, and people are still, like you said, suffering the material repercussions of it to this day. So I don't want to ramble too much, but yeah, I don't think it's just a battle of representation, taking down these monuments. It's a first step, and it's a really important one.
Thank you. Did either of you want to chime in?
Well, I think I guess what immediately is in my mind is I think it's hard, especially in this country, in the U.S., for people to grasp what settler colonialism is, and even still having the realization that it's ongoing, it's been ongoing. And when it comes to identity, it's a way for folks to fall into delusion, and to also, I guess what's also just terrifying is how normal the bloody history of colonizers is in this country, and that's even harder for people to let go and realize is that's their legacy and they benefit from it. And when it comes to land here in the US, it's also sometimes land theft benefits or even gets the US out of a bad economy, or it somehow improves it, if that makes sense. But then again, it's Indigenous people are the expense of that, our quality of life, and even our history falls into that too. So I don't know, I guess that's kind of one thing I was thinking about, just hearing you two talk. But yeah,
absolutely. I think you're right. Colonialism is one of the most profitable enterprises in history. They've built fortunes.
Right. The global system, capitalism. I mean, that's why we're socialists, right? And that's why many successful revolutions have been socialist revolutions. And so talking about settler colonialism and the different ways it manifests, on the way over. So Justine has been to Palestine, so have Dee and Kylie. And we were talking about how
have you been?
I have not.
You have to come.
I want to. I will eventually.
We have good food.
I hear. I think never
God.
That's why I try to talk about keffiyeh.
Okay, we have better food than keffiyeh.
Okay, all right. I hear you.
Yeah.
I'm here for that.
Don't believe the hype. Yeah.
All right. Right straight from your mouth. I want to take it seriously. So we were talking about how, we look at, we're encouraged to look at settler colonialism on this one-way trajectory, right? But we know that's not always how it works. And looking at, where the settler colonial project is at, or how we're affected by it, in different ways or unevenly. Justine said, it was really powerful to see, you know, the way Palestinians like have this sense of like community and love for each other and working together, whereas like with a lot of Native folks here, it can be very hard to get our people, you know, to be down with our causes. And I know that that's a unique problem everywhere, right? Is, you know, when there's a lot at risk, people don't want to risk things by, you know, participating in the heavier stuff. And how here, like, Native people don't recognize what's happening in Palestine as settler colonialism, right? Because we're living in almost like a future, like hundreds of years kind of past the point of occupation, right? And so Native people here, it's kind of hard to get them to explain, like, this is what happened to us is what is actively happening there, right? It is the same kind of project. It's the same actors who designed these projects, you know, and they used the war policy used against us to genocide Native people as foreign policy that's being applied elsewhere in U.S. imperialist projects. So I just kind of wanted to get into that to ask you, like, you know, how can we, you know, talk about these things in a way that, you know, prompts our people to want to build those relationships and see our struggles as a mutual struggle, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is like a two-way street in many ways, because I could say exactly the same thing about the Palestinian people. I think many of us recognize the parallels and recognize the similarities between our people's struggle for liberation and the indigenous struggle for liberation, but we are not really aware of the material circumstances, the specific elements, how it manifested, what policies shape it, what shaped it, and what policies continue to shape it today. And even within myself, like, I recognize an illiteracy of understanding this history. You know, I know that, like, Mahmoud Darwish, our poet, was in conversation with a few indigenous poets, and I know that there's been like statements historically from collectives here and there, but this kind of like material analysis is absent. And I will say also, like, it's really nice to hear you say that you think we Palestinians can come together in community, because there is a lot of infighting, there's a lot on the line for many people, and also many people are, you know, business owners, and many people are business-minded, and there's like a class dynamic that seldom gets addressed, and people want to protect their, you know, interests, and this is constantly a battle, especially like being here in the United States and, you know, urging people to participate more courageously, because, you know, there are real repercussions that are harmful. There are real you know, if you're a student, you could lose your academic prospects. If you're a professional, you could lose your career. If you support Palestine, you could be smeared left and right, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, these things, I'm afraid, do not compare to like life on the ground. And I think, you know, liberation requires these kinds of small sacrifices. You know, when I first came to this country, I had a small, this is going to sound offensive, but I promise it's not. I had a small problem with land acknowledgements, because I remember I would like sit and people would like say, you know, we're on Lenape territory, and then that's it. There was no native person in the room. There was no connection to the indigenous struggle. It was just like kind of this ceremonial ritual that you do at the beginning of the you know, the lecture, at the beginning of the poetry reading, or the open mic, or whatever, the Friendsgiving, and then you know, it's just that there is nothing beyond it. And I think, you know, this is a little bit of our own shortcoming. Now, your question, now I'm getting to it, is how can we build these bridges, or like how can we encourage people to work together? It's really hard. First of all, you know, both respective communities have a lot going on respectively, that it's really hard to look outside of their own universe. But if we can, you know, kind of show one another how our liberations hinge on each other, I think that's the key. And there's lots of ways to do it, you know, culture, literature, direct actions, and so on. But I'm certainly not an expert. And I think, you know, like coming into this podcast, I was like scrambling to read as much as I can, and I realized like my own ignorance of indigenous, not only history, but like the present day indigenous struggles that are facing, people here, despite living on, I can say I live on Lenape territory, but I can't say much more. And I think that's a problem.
Well, thank you for saying that about land acknowledgements, because you're right. And don't feel guilty about having that position, because you're right.
Yeah, we hate it too.
Because it's just I don't know. I feel like if I ever go sit down in a coffee shop in Tel Aviv and some like leftist Israeli guy with a dangly earring goes, we're on indigenous land, I'm like, you should get out of my house.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh my God. Want to follow that up,
They can't be leftist if they haven't left yet.
Yes! That's the name of the episode.
I saw that on a tweet. I'm sorry. I saw that.
That's what we're calling this.
Yeah.
You were talking about material conditions of like indigenous people here. Well, I mean, it's rough out here for Native people. We're constantly targeted by police. Like I think we're like number one, like racially for like police killings and
Native
police
women per capita exceed
disappearances.
Police killings. Native women exceed per capita even the rates at which Black men are murdered in the United States.
I don't know if you even noticed it, but along Central, which is like this main road, just how much like unsheltered Native people there are, being unsheltered on your own lands. A lot of Native people are unemployed. There's no jobs back home. That's the other thing is back on the Navajo Nation, my nation. A lot of people have jobs off the reservation, and they can't come back home, or they can't like afford to live at home. And so like there's like this huge, not only that, just this recently the Supreme Court said that they're not obligated to protect Navajo Nation water rights. And so there's we're losing land, we're losing water, we're losing our people. Even just during COVID, like we were the number one like in the world for like COVID deaths like per capita. So these are just like some of the things that Native people still face today, and that is why like something like the Red Nation exists, is to like highlight these issues and to stand up for our people and to give power to our people, because it's such a weird phenomenon of like all these things are happening. Like we can see it, we read about it, we observe it, we experience it, we live it, but there's like this like denial of like this is like happening. Like there's this denial that we're like slowly like succumbing to the settler project of us just totally being like eradicated, getting off our lands. But yeah, I guess like that is like why it is rough out here. And not only just like even what happened today up north is like, even though there was like some speakers there, non-native people, that were against the statue, that were against like the false history that these people are speaking about. But in the same breath, they're calling us like, hey, like we're all Americans, like it was bad, but it wasn't like that bad, like it's like that weird. They're trying to be like the middle. They're just liberals,
Yeah. And it's that failure to recognize the United States as an occupying force. Mm-hmm. That's what people couldn't understand. That we are being occupied by like a settler project.
But it's like they benefit from that refusal to recognize, right? This is like, again, these are, it's like even in Palestine, sorry, not to draw like, sometimes when you draw parallels, it can be empowering, but it could also be like, kind of, I don't want to disrespect the intimacy of each struggle, but I think in Palestine, the Zionist colonization crystallized kind of in 1948, but then there was another wave of occupation in 1967, and a lot of these like well-meaning leftist Israelis will recognize the occupation of 67 and they will chant for a free Palestine, and they just cannot fathom the idea that the Arab home they're sitting in, the Palestinian balconies from which they drink their coffees, are also stolen and colonized. And and that's because that's where they lay their heads to sleep. That's where they make their money. And there's a lot for them on the line. There's a lot people. This is the truth. This is the truth. I think about land back. This is the truth about redistribution. This is the truth about liberating Palestine. When we talk about it, I go to universities all the time and I speak about this. And the first thing people ask me is, what happens to the settlers? And this is the compass of the person, right? This is the main concern of the person, is that what happens to the already comfortable settler? No one ever asks what happens to the people perishing away in refugee camps, or what happens to the people who are homeless on the street. And yeah, I mean, we have to be honest about these things.
We were literally like making jokes, like morbid jokes before you got here. We're like, so do you mean all the land, or just like
you say land bag?
Yeah, that's exactly what we get. That's exactly what we get. And what's and then are you gonna demolish the settlements, or are you gonna live in, or like what about the nice settlers and blah blah blah? Like this is the
ridiculous. Like
we'll find out when it happens. We'll find out how this happens.
So I wanted to, again, you hear us keep mentioning Palestine, and this is for a very specific reason. We're always going to include Palestine in everything we do, because what's happening in Palestine is settler colonialism. And if we want to understand what settler colonialism is, if we want to understand what happened here, we need to look what's happening in Palestine to see what settler colonialism in action looks like, to see what it looks like when people are actually being removed from their families, physically forced out, when children are being murdered. The Israeli occupation forces murdered 5 children since the start of this month in the past 10 days. What's happening there is active apartheid, it's active settler colonialism, and it's active genocide. So we as Indigenous people are always going to take the lead of our Palestinian relatives. We're always going to follow them. We're always going to follow their legacy, because we know that until Palestine is free, nowhere is free. No one is free. So with that, I'd like to welcome our Palestinian comrade and relative, Yael, to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Okay, I'm going to read something out because I'm not a great public speaker and English is my second language. Dear comrades and relatives, my name is Wael Omar and I'm from Palestine. I'm part of the Palestine Youth Movement and I've come all the way to Turtle Island and specifically Tiwa territory to stand in solidarity with you on this day. I feel really humbled and empowered to be on this land with all of you, a land whose custodians have been fighting for its liberation for centuries. We have learned a lot from you and continue to learn from you until this day. Our struggle is quite young compared to your struggle, and you continue to inspire us and give us hope. We continue to learn from your tactics, language, relationship to the land, and I really can't stress this enough. You are a testament for us and continue to remind us that no matter how much land Israel steals, no matter how much violence they inflict on us, with the support of the US government, of course, our struggle for the end of capitalism, colonialism, heteropatriarchy, and our struggle for land back, sovereignty and liberation is not over, and in fact, closer than ever. Despite our differences, our struggle is one. And together we stand against the global north and its collaborators at home who continue to profit through the disposition of Indigenous and Black lives and through their imperial wars in the global south. This is why it's key for Indigenous, Black and brown and working class people all over the world to build relationships and extend kinships with one another and organize and work together to fight capitalism and colonialism. As our elders have shown us, Third world anti-colonial internationalism rooted in local organizing is the path for our mutual liberation. On a last note, I really hate centering our enemy, and our enemy is not what brings us together. More importantly, it's one because we share the same source of life, love and existence, and that is land. To the land we belong, and for the land we fight. We will continue to fight. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you so much, comrade. That was lovely. So again, like emphasizing, this is an international struggle and we are not alone, even if it seems like it. Even if it seems hard day to day, even if it seems like we're never gonna achieve our victories, the victory is always just over the horizon. And just know that Indigenous people worldwide, there's so many of us, and there's successful Native revolution, there's successful instances of this. I'm always looking to the global south, right? Sometimes we center our experiences here in the north, but we need to remember what's happening in the rest of the world and take their lead, because we're not alone.
Thank you both for those perspectives. I just want to talk a little bit about the work of Indigenous solidarity with Palestine. You know, Zionism is a settler colonial project that needs to be named. There is an intuitive feeling among the Anglo-settler nations, such as the United States and Canada, for example, that we did it and it must be right. And because settler societies have a different mentality. We exterminated the Indigenous people, so there must be something right about it. Whether it's a superior civilization or other ideological justifications. But settler colonialism hasn't ended. Acts of apologies or so-called truth and reconciliation happen from the comfort of settler societies that have so thoroughly subjugated Native people through violence and genocide that they have no fear that symbolic acts change the socio-economic or political realities of today. In other words, they don't challenge the colonial relation. In fact, they could be seen as a technology of colonial rule. There are some important caveats to this. Indigenous movements have also attacked the symbols of settler colonialism, such as monuments, sports mascots, and statues glorifying conquest, and have faced violent backlash, as we as a Red Nation have experienced. These actions may help elevate the consciousness of the Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples and our allies, but they don't radically alter the colonial relation. They are typically the first steps in a more political direction. And I don't want to minimize, changing or abolishing, sports mascots or changing language or doing these sort of symbolic acts. They do lead and they can lead to more radical change. But settler societies implement these sorts of things, such as land acknowledgement, knowing that there isn't anything that they are necessarily giving up or fundamentally changing about the relationship to Indigenous people. For Palestine, however, we can see in today's discourse even the hint of Palestinian humanity. Earns one the label of anti-Semite. Slogans advocating social justice and dignity for Palestinians, such as "From the river to the sea," have been roundly denigrated, dismissed, and condemned as racist. Palestinians are implored to resort to nonviolence in the face of mechanized weapons of war and bombing campaigns, funded and backed by the most powerful military force in world history. But the Israeli Zionists is never implored to colonize and to settle nonviolently, because we know the first words the Zionist state uttered was violence and dispossession. And it appears to be the only language it is capable of speaking to Palestinians. Palestinians and their supporters are ritualistically asked to condemn terrorism as bombs and bullets rain down on their homes, killing and displacing people in numbers that are equivalent and potentially, if not stopped, may exceed those killed and displaced during the Nakba of 1948. Israel is still dispossessing because they failed in the early stages of 1948 to eliminate Palestinians as a people. That's why a cultural boycott and divestment campaigns targeting Israeli institutions and businesses have a profound tangible impact on the socioeconomic and political realities on the ground. In other words, these things that may seem cultural or operating within the symbolic realm have more impact because the alignment between the United States and Israel, for example, despite all the military aid and everything, is fundamentally ideological. So attacking that ideological basis is so important, and that's why the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions campaign has asked and organized within the context of settler colonies like the United States. But such campaigns also undermine the legitimacy of the occupation and the success of Israel winning international legitimacy and recognition for their acts. In closing, I just want to read a poem that I wrote in the aftermath, based on my experiences with the Palestinian Festival of Literature, which Leanne and I have talked about and both participated in. I'm not a poet. Both Ua and Leanne, you're poets, so bear with me. The first thing I discovered in Palestine was that poetry measures distance. Bint Nakba, and don't you forget it, my grandfather warned me. Jehan Beseso read from her poem commemorating the Nakba's 70th anniversary in a basement East Jerusalem theater. We were told that Gazan writers were not allowed to leave the world's largest open-air prison to participate in this year's Palestine Festival of Literature, or PalFest. They sent a video-recorded message of well wishes and regrets. How far was Gaza, I wondered? Our indigenous territories seem large and vast, but Palestine seems so small on the map in comparison. The distance to Gaza is measured by security checkpoints, I was told, which can take hours or days to cross if one's lucky. And for millions, the right of return to one's homelands is measured by concrete walls, concertina wire, citizenship status, stamps on a passport, Arabic names, UN resolutions, the Israeli nation-state law, and families of Israeli settlers occupying Palestinian homes. In Ramallah, Omar Barghouti told us he was on his way to the United States to attend his daughter's wedding and to speak about the right to boycott one's occupiers. I told him to meet with American Indian leaders when he arrived, and that he was always welcome in our Lakota homelands as a relative and friend. Those words were useless, however, because days later, our occupier denied him access to our homelands. From Palestine, the distance to Turtle Island is measured by a passport, and whether one has the right to boycott an illegal occupation. This is one thing that Palestine taught me. For Palestinians, distances aren't measured by miles or kilometers. They're measured by settler laws, walls, and armed checkpoints. The Great March of Return was also a measure of distance. How far was one willing to travel for freedom? At what cost? Israeli snipers targeted the backs of knees to force amputation as Gazans attempted to cross a perimeter fence. It's their right to return home under international law. Jahan's poem sticks in my mind. And if we lose our legs, we will crawl on our hands and elbows. Despite the distances we must travel for freedom, Palestine is always near my heart. Colonial time creates different temporalities. It speeds up and slows down. It's thick like mud weighing on the feet of the colonized, attempting to stick them in place in the past or in forever negation. The feet of the colonizer, on the other hand, are light and mobile. The colonizer's time is quick. A passport, the right skin color, the correct language, anything but Arabic, and an entitled jaunt grant fast access to a world others only dream about. A sidewalk, an access road, air, an ocean. Yet the colonial reality is meant to exaggerate time, to make its novelty on the historical stage seem as natural as the olive groves and rolling hills. Like the ocean or Gaza, the history of known freedom is just over that hill. Though it stretches far back into time, it is familiar to everyone. A poem, a song, a story, a stone. You can smell it. It's the fire that still burns in our hearts, thousands of grasslands and sacred mountains away, where we also put our feet in the dirt, grasped our history, and said no. And we came crashing down on them like waves of history.